American twins. Karissa and Kristina Shannon gained fame as identical Playboy playmates who moved into Hugh Hefner's mansion together in 2008 when they were just 19 years old. They starred as Hefner's new girlfriends on the reality series The Girls Next Door before landing roles in other reality series including Celebrity Big Brother and Botched. In addition to making headlines for their budding showbiz careers, the Shannons occasionally landed in gossip columns for their arguably wild behavior. In October of 2008, Karissa and Kristina were accused of smashing a beer bottle over a woman's head and beating her at a party months earlier. The victim, listed in court documents under the name Derika, suffered a concussion, and the sisters were arrested for aggravated battery. According to a police report, Kristina was extremely drunk during the altercation. The police report stated that the incident began when Derika's boyfriend tried selling Xanax to the twins, although it's unclear what caused the interaction to escalate. Karissa accused Derika's boyfriend of attacking her and Kristina and claimed that they were just defending themselves. She also told police that the man was calling Kristina names and making her cry, although some reports pointed at Karissa as the aggressor, noting that she was accused of kicking Kristina in the face during the altercation. While the sisters told noticeably different versions of what had happened, they both pleaded no contest to the aggravated battery charge and were sentenced to probation. They were also ordered to pay $7,000 in restitution to the victim. Number 25. Caleb and Joshua Bledsoe. In September of 2013, 25-year-old twins Caleb and Joshua Bledsoe set fire to their Ellensburg, Washington home in an attempt to murder their 70-year-old father, William Bledsoe. All three men were at the scene when emergency responders arrived. One of them was treated for smoke inhalation, but they all managed to avoid serious injury. Arson investigators determined that the fire had been started deliberately using kerosene as an accelerant. Improvised explosive devices had been placed around the residence, and there was also evidence to suggest that Caleb and Joshua were planning to flee the country, including guns, passports, and money that was found stashed in the brothers' vehicle. During police questioning, they reportedly said they wanted to kill their dad because he was difficult to live with and work for. 3 months after the attempt on their father's life, the twins each pleaded guilty to second-degree domestic violence attempted murder. They were both sentenced to 9 years in prison, followed by 3 years of post-release supervision. During an interview with ABC News, William Bledsoe refused to criticize his sons who had tried to kill him, stating, "My boys are my boys, and I'll never abandon them and not support them." He made it clear that he was not in denial about the reality of the situation, while admitting that he probably wasn't the easiest person to work alongside or share a home with. Number 24. Corey and Tyler Knepp. In November of 2019, 33-year-old twins Corey and Tyler Knepp were arrested in Manitowoc County, Wisconsin, following their involvement in a deadly rollover vehicle crash. The ill-fated series of events began shortly after 6 o'clock in the morning, when law enforcement received reports about 2 men fighting outside a Honda Accord on a highway off-ramp in Kossuth Township. Corey and Tyler got back into the car and drove away before deputies arrived at the scene, but they were the subject of another emergency call just minutes later after the car overturned in a ditch. According to reports, Corey was driving when the sedan veered off the road and landed upside down. A female passenger, 29-year-old Emily LaPointe, was ejected from the vehicle during the crash. She died at the scene from blunt force trauma, and the Knepp twins were taken by ambulance to a Green Bay hospital for non-life-threatening injuries. After investigating the tragic accident, authorities charged Corey and Tyler each with possession of drugs as a repeat offender, possession of drug paraphernalia as a repeat offender, and disorderly conduct. In November of 2020, Corey and Tyler both pleaded guilty to possession of drug paraphernalia as a repeat offender. The other 2 charges were dropped, and they were each fined $831. Number 23. Linzell and Lindell Williams. 20-year-old twin brothers Linzell Lamar Williams and Lindell Marlin Williams stole at least 85 guns along with ammunition, electronics, money, video game consoles, and other valuables during a residential burglary spree throughout Hampton and Colleton counties in South Carolina. According to authorities, the brothers have a history of indulging in the same behavior. In the words of Assistant Solicitor Tremika, who prosecuted the pair for burglary and other charges in 2018, what one does, the other does. In April of that year, Linzell and Lindell each pleaded guilty to 4 counts of second-degree burglary. News reports state that they were both sentenced to 15 years in prison, but records show that only Lindell is currently in state custody, while Linzell is participating in a re-entry program designed to help him transition smoothly to civilian life. 3 other suspects, Essa Lyndall Williams Jr., Sean Eric Kirkland, and Tyshawn DeWild Frazier faced charges in connection with the string of burglaries. Their cases were pending at the time of the Williams brothers' sentencing, and none of the three men appear to currently be serving prison time. Number 22. Paul and Joshua Walker. In June of 2023, 34-year-olds Joshua and Paul Walker of Okeechobee, Florida, were seen peering suspiciously into car windows outside a Wendy's restaurant in Sebastian. During a conversation with a 911 dispatcher, a woman explained that she had been sitting in her vehicle when a man with unkempt facial hair pressed his face up against the driver's side window. She was so alarmed that she sped off in her car. As the woman pulled around the restaurant to leave, she noticed an identical man crouched near another vehicle. In addition to calling 911, she went into the restaurant and warned the employees about the brothers' suspicious behavior. She caught one last glimpse of the twins while leaving the restaurant. When she saw them in some bushes, they appeared to be scoping out a neighboring parking lot. While the complainant spoke with a responding officer, two other cops found the Walkers lurking on a nearby property, where one of the brothers was allegedly hiding under a car while the other was attempting to conceal himself. Joshua reportedly told the cops that he was peeking into a car window because he was looking around for police cars. He said he believed the police were following him and that he wanted to avoid them. Paul gave a similar explanation, adding that he was a habitual traffic violator and that he and Joshua were trying to avoid law enforcement by cutting through the Wendy's parking lot. Neither of the twins offered an explanation for why they were seen peering into car windows, however, and they were each charged with one count of prowling. Records show that the Walkers both pleaded no contest to the charge and received short jail terms plus probation. Number 21. Ronald and Donald Barnes. Some twins share more than a birthday and an identical appearance. Take, for example, Ronald and Donald Barnes of Beaumont, Texas, who both have lengthy criminal records. In August of 2024, the brothers were arrested on identical criminal charges after local law enforcement executed a narcotics search warrant at their home. During the raid, police found a rifle and 14 ounces of synthetic marijuana. In the meantime, nearby Jones Clark Elementary School went into lockdown for about 20 minutes while the search was carried out. Ronald and Donald, who were both 57 years old at the time, were arrested on charges of possession of a controlled substance, felon in possession of a firearm, and tampering with evidence. They were booked into custody at the Jefferson County Correctional Facility as they waited to see a judge. Updates have not been forthcoming, leaving the outcome of the case unclear. Number 20. Jade, Alexis, and Justice Wade Christensen. Shortly before 2 a.m. one Sunday morning in September of 2019, police in Iowa City, Iowa, were alerted to an assault at a local intersection. Witnesses pointed to a fleeing Ford Fusion, sparking the beginning of a harrowing pursuit. The vehicle's driver refused to pull over despite officers' use of their flashing lights and sirens, and the car continued barreling along at 70 miles per hour in a 25-mile-per-hour zone. Later identified as 20-year-old Justice Wade Christensen, the reckless motorist eventually lost control of the car and crashed. He and his twin sister, Jade Alexis Christensen, ditched the vehicle and fled on foot. They were captured shortly thereafter and were both booked into custody on multiple charges. Jade was charged with providing false identification, public intoxication, being underage in a bar, and operating while under the influence. Justice was charged with eluding, reckless driving, harassing a public officer, driving while license denied or suspended, operating while under the influence, public intoxication, and interference with official acts. The Christensens were both released from custody later that day, but the outcome of the case is unclear. Number 19. Clinton and Clifford Pappadakis. In February of 2018, two twin brothers from California were arrested over a 2-week period for possessing illegal images of juveniles. 47-year-olds Clinton and Clifford Pappadakis, both public school employees, were busted by the San Jose Police Department's Internet Crimes Against Children Unit after falling under suspicion months earlier. An investigation was launched after the agency received a tip from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, who had received complaints from concerned parents. The brothers also attracted scrutiny due to Clinton's alleged purchase of a certain type of doll, and because he was photoshopping students' faces onto images of unclothed people. Clifford Pappadakis, a former middle school gym teacher and track and field coach, was the first of the twins to be arrested. He was charged with 8 felony criminal counts after he was reportedly seen snapping inappropriate photos of female students. By the time he was arrested, he had been let go from his job due to his suspicious conduct, and police found additional illicit photos in his possession while searching his belongings and property. The following week, law enforcement arrested Clinton Pappadakis, a former high school track and field coach. During a search of his home and belongings, investigators found incriminating images on multiple devices. Clinton was charged with possessing the illegal material and fired from his job following his arrest. In August of 2018, Clifford pleaded guilty to all 8 charges against him and was sentenced to 3 years of probation, including 8 months of home confinement and GPS monitoring. He was also ordered to pay restitution to his victims' families and will have to register as a predator for life. Clifford had been free since shortly after his arrest, which means that he served practically no jail time for his crimes. Many parents were infuriated by this seemingly lenient sentence, and they were in no mood to forgive when Clifford apologized for his actions during his sentencing hearing. Clinton was still facing charges when he passed away in 2020, and the case against him was subsequently dropped. Number 18. Dennis and Bobby Harris. 2 Louisiana residents were critically injured during a drive-by shooting in June of 2021 when someone in a tan Chevy SUV opened fire on the victims in broad daylight in Ouachita Parish. News reports identified the victims as former high school football players Xavier Wright, who was 18 years old at the time, and Wesley Williams, who was a juvenile. They both survived, but law enforcement released few other details about the case as they worked to solve it. Investigators identified twin brothers Dennis and Bobby Harris as the suspects in the case, but the siblings remained at large for nearly a year. In June of 2022, they were finally captured and charged with 6 counts each of attempted second-degree murder. Bobby faced additional drug and weapon-related charges, including possession with intent to distribute, illegal possession of a stolen firearm, and possession of drug paraphernalia. The brothers were booked into custody at the Ouachita Correctional Center on bonds totaling $6.5 million between the two. Following news of Dennis and Bobby's arrests, the case fell quiet in the news, but neither of the twins appear to currently be in state or county lockup. Number 17. Australian Lego thieves. In October 2024, a pair of Australian twins were arrested for stabbing a 34-year-old security guard while stealing boxes of Legos at the Elizabeth Bus Interchange in Adelaide. The guard was attempting to confront the 27-year-old sisters after seeing them leave a nearby shopping centre with the unpaid merchandise. Instead of handing the stolen goods over and cooperating, one of the women stabbed the guard in the forearm, leaving him with a non-life-threatening wound. The suspects were also accused of being aggressive toward a police officer who was trying to arrest them, causing minor injuries. One of the sisters was charged with theft and released from custody later that night, while the other was held in custody on charges of assault causing harm, resisting arrest, and assaulting a prescribed emergency service worker. News reports did not reveal the sisters' names, and there has been no media follow-up regarding what became of the case. Number 16. Jamal and Jamel Walker. In late 2017, 42-year-old twin brothers Jamal and Jamel Walker were arrested in Costa Mesa, California, for burglarizing a rare coin shop and leading police on a vehicle and foot pursuit. Police responded to the incident just before 7:30 a.m. after being contacted by someone who had witnessed the crime on surveillance footage. In the video, the suspect could reportedly be seen breaking open the coin shop's front doors and stealing items from inside. The siblings, both of Los Angeles, fled the scene in an SUV with temporary plates before law enforcement arrived. Officers spotted the vehicle in the area and chased after it as the driver barreled along a freeway at a high speed. Jamal and Jamel abandoned the SUV near John Wayne Airport and fled on foot. Nearby officers caught up to them after overhearing the window of a nearby building being shattered. The twins were arrested at gunpoint on suspicion of burglary, conspiracy to commit a crime, and evading police. In the meantime, police searched the Walkers' vehicle and found gloves, coins, and burglary tools. The outcome of the case is unclear. Number 15. Jerome and Tyrone Cooper. For many people, the Valentine's Day holiday conjures up romantic thoughts, but it became a day of nightmares for a 26-year-old Michigan woman who was brutally assaulted in Grand Rapids on February 14th, 1999. She was walking to her vehicle after a nighttime college class in the city's downtown area when a complete stranger approached her and did what he wanted to her. DNA evidence turned up as a match to a Twin Lake man named Jerome Cooper, and police initially believed that this meant the case was solved, but they were thrown for a loop when they learned that Jerome has an identical twin brother, Tyrone. Both Coopers denied the attack, and neither of them had an alibi. And because the brothers have identical DNA, it was impossible to say which of them committed the crime. The case was still unsolved 17 years later when law enforcement received hopeful news. A revolutionary new DNA test had supposedly enabled authorities in Boston, Massachusetts, to identify which of two twin brothers were responsible for attacking two women. Much like the case involving the Coopers, the Boston case had ground to a standstill after traditional DNA tests were unable to differentiate between the suspects. The test was expensive, but prosecutors in Grand Rapids hoped that they might be able to somehow afford the new technology. But cost wasn't the only issue. In June of 2018, a judge overseeing the Boston case ruled that the technology was inadmissible in court because it hadn't been verified by independent scientists. This meant that the case could no longer set a precedent for anyone to follow in its footsteps, and it gave Michigan authorities even less reason to try justifying the test's six-figure price tag. The setback left prosecutors in both Boston and Grand Rapids feeling exasperated as they were once again relegated back to square one. To this day, no charges have been brought in either case. Both Jerome and Tyrone Cooper are now in their 50s, and they've both been convicted of the types of crimes that make either one seem like a possible candidate for being the attacker. Number 14. Jerome and Tyrone Page. High school student Amanda Lee Hall wasn't even old enough to drive when she ran away from her home in Lansdowne, Maryland in June of 1992 following a fallout with her boyfriend. She spent the first 2 days with friends but ended up sleeping outside a bathroom at a local community center after that. Just 3 days after Hall ran off on her own, a man named Raphael Marin found her body in an overgrown area along a disused road while walking to work. She had been strangled to death and was half clothed and covered in bruises. Not far from the scene, officers encountered the heartbreaking sight of Hall's makeshift campsite, which included her pillows, clothing, and stuffed animals. Detectives sent hair and blood samples to the FBI for testing. Based on the results, authorities charged 34-year-old twin brothers Jerome and Tyrone Page with Hall's murder. At the time, Jerome was already on parole for a second-degree murder conviction that he had served a decade in prison for. In the previous case, he had stabbed a man in the throat with a fork. In 1993, Jerome was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. During Tyrone's trial, his attorney argued that the defendant was a good person who had acted under the evil influence of his twin brother. The defense also claimed that Tyrone had the intellect of a child, and several witnesses testified that Jerome had led Tyrone astray with his criminal ways. Jerome had maintained his innocence during his trial, but he took the stand during Tyrone's trial and took credit for killing Hall in order to spare his brother from the death penalty. Tyrone was sentenced to life without parole, and it remains unclear which of the two, or if both brothers, are responsible for killing Hall. Number 13. Daniel and David DeWild. 30-year-old mother of two, Heather DeWild, vanished during the summer of 2003 after going to the Edgewater, Colorado home of her estranged husband, Daniel, to pick up some health insurance cards. She never retrieved the cards, but her car was missing, and the kids had been left with Daniel, who told his wife's immediately suspicious family that Heather had simply never returned after dropping the children off and going shopping. About a week after Heather vanished, her car was found abandoned outside a local apartment complex. It had been cleaned meticulously and scrubbed clean of any sign of Heather. About a month later, a worker found the missing woman's body while moving dirt along a remote canyon road. Heather had been wrapped in trash bags with her head covered in duct tape, and her remains were so decomposed that it was impossible to determine the cause of death. Her family had suspected Dan of being responsible for her disappearance from the beginning, but there wasn't enough evidence to charge him with any crimes, even though he had gone on a dating website and labeled himself as widowed before Heather went missing, and despite the contentious child custody battle that the former spouses were entangled in when she disappeared, the case sat at a standstill for 6 years with no new leads. And in 2009, Heather's family persuaded the local district attorney to reopen the investigation. While examining cell phone location data and other evidence, it became evident that Dan had likely received help killing and disposing of Heather from his twin brother, David. In a surprising turn of events, David admitted that Dan had bludgeoned and hanged Heather in the garage of the brothers' home. He confessed to disposing of Heather's car and agreed to testify against Dan in exchange for a 12-year prison sentence for conspiracy. Daniel DeWild pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. After his trial ended in a hung jury in 2012, he was sentenced to 74 years in prison, and David was paroled in 2020. Number 12. Jeff and Chris George. Florida twins Jeffrey and Christopher George fell in love with money after they realized how easy it was to get rich by taking advantage of people's addictions to narcotic painkillers. In 2007, they began opening pain clinics in and around Broward County, where the pain management industry was minimally regulated at the time. Instead of operating as legitimate medical centers aimed at helping people with chronic pain issues achieve the best quality of life possible, the businesses essentially functioned as pill mills. Patients traveled to the clinics from near and far to get their prescriptions from hired doctors, many of whom were willing to engage in questionable practices in exchange for their paychecks. Waiting rooms were packed to the brim, and patients often lined up outside the door while they waited for the clinics to open in the morning. It became a common sight for people to pass out in the parking lot after obtaining their prescriptions, making clear to witnesses that something was very wrong with how the businesses were being run. The George brothers fell under legal scrutiny after their long-distance patients began dying in car accidents during their drives home due to being high on painkillers. But they continued to operate the clinics with little concern or care for the lives that were being destroyed. With no shortage of paying customers, the twins became extremely wealthy, taking home garbage bags full of cash and spending it on lavish homes and vehicles. Unbeknownst to Chris and Jeff, both local and federal authorities were watching, and in 2010 their clinics were raided as part of a multi-agency effort to shut down the pill mills for good. Authorities charged the twins, their mother, Denise Haggerty, Chris's wife, Diana, 13 doctors, and 15 other suspects on RICO charges for their alleged roles in running the clinics. Additionally, Jeff faced a murder charge for the overdose death of a patient. Many of the defendants took plea deals and received prison time, including George's mother and Diana George, who were both sentenced to 4.5 years. Chris George cooperated against 2 doctors and received a 14-year sentence. He was released from prison in 2022, while Jeff remains behind bars while serving a 20-year term. Number 11. Mark and Scott Blankenburg. In March of 2009, 54-year-old twins and pediatricians Mark and Scott Blankenburg were arrested in Butler County, Ohio, on dozens of charges for disturbing acts against children. During an investigation, police uncovered evidence that the brothers' crimes may have stemmed as far back as the early 90s. Mark Blankenburg was charged with 41 crimes relating to his alleged abuse of 4 victims, while Scott faced 22 charges for harming 2 victims. Additionally, the Blankenburgs faced charges of bribery and money laundering, and Mark was hit with drug trafficking counts. Local residents and authorities alike were shocked by the arrests of the twins, who until then were well-respected members of their community. Following their trial in October 2009, Mark was found guilty of 26 counts and Scott was convicted of 8 counts. Scott was paroled in 2022 after serving a 13-year prison term and will remain under supervision until September 2027, while Mark remains behind bars and is expected to be paroled in March of 2028. Number 10. Wasel and Wael Ali. In August of 2007, 19-year-old Wasel Ali was found strangled to death on a secluded pathway in Columbia, Maryland. 4 years later, authorities charged his twin brother, Wael Ali, with his murder. Prosecutors accused Wael of killing Wasel in a fit of rage after discovering that the pair had been implicated in a theft scheme at the Banana Republic clothing store where Wasel worked. Additionally, the state pointed out the brothers' history of getting into legal trouble together, including past charges for impersonating law enforcement and shoplifting. Wael adamantly denied the allegations, arguing through his attorney that he would never kill his twin brother and best friend. He was acquitted during the spring of 2012 after his trial ended in a deadlocked jury. The state declined to retry the case and Wael walked free, much to the relief of the many supportive family members who had attended his court hearings, eager to get a fresh start. He moved to Marietta, Georgia the following year, but his future plans were cut short in November 2013 when he was fatally shot by a family friend whose gun accidentally discharged. While they were showing Wael the weapon inside a restaurant, Wael was laid to rest next to his brother, and the gun owner, Rauf Sanad, was charged with involuntary manslaughter. While it's unclear whether Sanad was convicted in the case, authorities conceded shortly after his arrest that they believed the shooting was unintentional and a tragic accident. Number 9. Jordan and Simon Gann. As the sons of wealthy parents, Jordan and Simon Gann of Methuen, Massachusetts, enjoyed a privileged upbringing, but instead of making an honest living themselves, they grew up to be career romance swindlers. Like many Cupid scammers, the twins used their charisma and good looks to convince their targets that they were rich and successful. They extracted money from their victims by pretending they had lost their cash or credit card, with the unsuspecting victims harboring no doubts that they would be reimbursed for covering an expense or floating alone. This was apparently a lifelong pattern for the brothers, who reportedly began to steal during their childhoods and were eventually kicked out of their parents' house for taking their mother's jewelry. No longer welcome at their own family's home, Jordan and Simon began drifting across the United States, taking advantage of trusting women every step of the way. They lived under aliases and posed as rich doctors, while squeezing what money they could out of their victims. The brothers' crimes eventually began to catch up to them, especially after victims began connecting with one another and using the internet to warn others about the gang's scheming ways. In 2008, Jordan was sentenced to 5 years in prison after being convicted of grand theft for robbing 2 women in Florida. 2 years later, in 2010, Simon was sentenced to 16 months behind bars for grand theft and witness tampering. The twins have been charged in other cases, but they seem to have fallen completely off the radar in recent years, leaving their current whereabouts and activities a mystery. Number 8. Doris and Yvette Gay. Doris and Yvette Gay were born into abject poverty and never managed to eke their way out of it. In 1990, when they were 27 years old, the identical twins found themselves living in an abandoned bus in Washington, North Carolina. They shared the unheated tiny living space with Yvette's 2 children, who were fathered by her married boyfriend, Renwick Gibbs. Renwick had spent several years bouncing back and forth between Yvette and his wife, Anne. Yvette became increasingly jealous of Anne and wanted Renwick to herself. He told Yvette that they could finally be together and get married if she cooperated with his plan to murder Anne and his in-laws. She agreed, and Doris watched her kids. Yvette and Renwick went to his in-laws' house where Anne was living after recently leaving him. What Yvette didn't know was that Renwick didn't plan to murder Anne. He wanted to kill her parents because he thought they were influencing her not to reconcile with him. Anne's mother, Louise, and her teenage brother and sister were the only ones home. The couple bound and gagged them, and Renwick mercilessly shot them dead execution style. Police immediately suspected Renwick, who had trouble keeping his story straight from the beginning. It wasn't long before he confessed to the murders and implicated Yvette and Doris for their roles in the crime. Even though Doris stayed behind, prosecutors believed that she played an integral role in the plot. Yvette and Renwick received 3 death sentences, which were later commuted to life in prison, and Doris received 3 life sentences. Number 7. Derika and Tremika Hamilton. During what began as a routine traffic stop in June of 2018, 33-year-old Derika Hamilton was pulled over by police in Charlotte, North Carolina. According to a local news report, she denied having any drugs on her but was caught with cocaine in her possession and charged accordingly. Later that month, police pulled over Derika's twin sister, Tremika Hamilton, for having a bad tag and an expired registration. While speaking with the woman, officers noticed a strong odor of marijuana emanating from her vehicle, giving them probable cause to search the car. Instead of cooperating, however, Tremika put the pedal to the metal and sped off. She managed to evade capture that day, but was arrested months later on an outstanding warrant stemming from the incident. Court records show that the cases against both sisters were dismissed for unspecified reasons. Both Tremika and Derika have arrest records dating back more than a decade, but many of the cases were ultimately dropped, and the Hamiltons seem to have avoided landing any hard time. In 2024, for example, Derika pleaded guilty to carrying a concealed weapon. She was granted a conditional discharge and avoided any criminal convictions after successfully meeting certain requirements set forth by the court, including completing a gun safety course. State court records show no new cases for Tremika since 2019, indicating that she's perhaps making a concerted effort to avoid any further run-ins with the law. Number 6. William and Christopher Cormier. 30-year-old Pensacola News-Journal reporter Sean Dugas vanished, seemingly into thin air, from his Florida home in August of 2012. Several weeks later, his body was found encased in concrete in the backyard of a Widner, Georgia home where 2 of his friends lived. 31-year-old twin brothers William and Christopher Cormier were accused of bludgeoning Dugas to death at his home and selling his Magic the Gathering card collection. The brothers and Dugas had befriended each other over their shared interest in the trading cards, but the Cormiers had apparently put greed before friendship after learning about their friend's collection, which was valued at $100,000. After the murder, William and Christopher emptied Dugas's home of everything except a broken TV. They took furniture, collectibles, and even the victim's silverware, and they sold the more valuable items while using the rest for themselves. According to prosecutors, William Cormier was dirt broke and had become so desperate for money that he had to sell the cards in order to buy the Rubbermaid bin that the victim's body was stuffed and buried in. He was accused of being the main perpetrator in the act, but his defense attorneys argued in court that Christopher was the real killer. Christopher had pleaded no contest to accessory after the fact and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. He had always been the more docile of the twins, but the defense claimed that the dynamic had switched shortly before Dugas's murder. Taking the stand in his own defense, William claimed that Christopher had asked him if he was willing to help Dugas move. He said he thought nothing of the request and was happy to assist, and that he didn't find it unusual when Christopher told him that Dugas was going to pay them in the form of magic cards. The defense told the jury that Christopher might have killed Dugas in a crime of passion, but failed to go into detail about the circumstances that might have led up to an incident like that. Additionally, William's attorney suggested that the conflicting stories being told in court could stem from certain witnesses not remembering things accurately. This version of events failed to sway the jury, however, and William was found guilty of first-degree murder, which carries an automatic life sentence without parole in the state of Florida. Number 5. Mark and Martin Stevens. 67-year-old Rita Stevens was stabbed to death with a carving knife by her own son, 44-year-old Mark Stevens, at their home in Pencoed, Wales, in June of 2015. Mark had just been drinking vodka at a nearby pub with his twin brother Martin when he flew into a drunken rage at his mother for questioning his handling of the family business. He stabbed Rita at least 38 times in the head and face, killing her at the scene, then covered her body with a blanket and took a nap. Upon waking from his slumber, Mark went to the store and bought more alcohol, seemingly unconcerned by the fact that his mother's corpse was lying on the family's living room floor. Of course, it was only a matter of time before Rita's death was discovered by other family members. Police took Mark in for questioning, and he reportedly admitted to killing his mother. In the meantime, local residents heard that Rita's son had been arrested for her murder, causing some to mistakenly assume that Martin was the culprit. Apparently unable to convince his critics that he was innocent, Martin faced an onslaught of cruel treatment from fellow community members who shoved him off his bicycle and refused to have anything to do with him. He was even told to stop reporting to his job, all the while grappling with complicated feelings toward his twin brother and trying to grieve his mother's death. Mark maintained his innocence but was found guilty following his trial in 2016. He was sentenced to life with a minimum of 20 years behind bars. Speaking with the Daily Mail following Mark's sentencing, Martin said that he had let go of his bitterness and that he forgave his brother for killing their mother. He even said that he planned to visit Mark in prison, displaying a level of forgiveness that many people would probably consider themselves incapable of. Number 4. Roman and Ruslan Glukhoy. Ruslan and Roman Glukhoy immigrated to the US from Ukraine with their parents as young boys. The family settled in California, where the brothers became star wrestlers as teens, and even went on to compete in state championships. But they veered down the wrong path after a car accident in 2011 left them both addicted to prescription painkillers. Police records obtained by CBS 13 show that the brothers have criminal records dating back to 2012 when they were still minors. One day in 2014, Roman and Ruslan got into a high-speed police chase after they were seen committing a burglary. They crashed their vehicle on a highway exit, so they abandoned it and stole a truck. The pair continued to flee law enforcement, reaching speeds of up to 100 miles per hour. They crashed the truck into a car during the early morning hours, killing 35-year-old Jose Luis Bayaga Tovar and his 14-year-old daughter, Anahai Tovar. Police charged the twins with 2 counts of murder each. Ruslan, who was behind the wheel, received 2 life sentences. Roman will spend 30 years to life behind bars. Number 3. Michael and Peter Versluys. During the pre-dawn hours of May 26th, 2014, an unclothed woman ran through the streets of Grand Rapids, Michigan, screaming for help. She was covered in blood and had a blanket draped around her shoulders, and her face appeared disfigured from being beaten with a baton. The 33-year-old victim was an escort who had agreed to exchange intimacy for drugs with twin brothers Michael and Peter Versluys. They went into an abandoned house to conduct business, but for reasons the woman was never able to understand, the interaction suddenly turned violent. She suffered 9 broken facial bones, a broken nose, and severe lacerations, which required reconstructive surgery to repair the damage. After brutally bludgeoning the victim, the Versluys twins fled the scene, at which point the victim ran out of the house in search of help. She was taken to the hospital and police arrested Michael and Peter for the beating. The brothers' roommate testified that the Versluys had returned home with blood on their arms and shirts. He also recalled seeing the defendants leaving the residence with a baton before the attacker revealed that they had taken LSD together earlier that night. During her testimony, the victim explained that one of the twins asked her where the money was before they started beating her. She described being held down by one of the men while the other beat her, and the Versluys stole her pants before leaving the scene. At the time of the assault, Peter Versluys was already on probation for passing bad checks. He pleaded guilty to several charges in June of 2014, including armed robbery and assault with intent to do great bodily harm, less than murder, and was sentenced to 23 to 50 years in prison. During his sentencing hearing, Peter apologized for his actions. He blamed his behavior on his drug and alcohol use, acknowledging that he knew it was no excuse for what he had done, but that the incident wouldn't have happened if he had been sober. In September 2015, Michael pleaded no contest to assault with intent to do great bodily harm, armed robbery, and more. He was sentenced to 12 to 35 years in prison and will become eligible for parole in 2026. Today's topic was requested by 4'11". If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Daluan and Daquan Code. During the summer of 2020, 22-year-old Daluan Code and Daquan Marquis Code of North Carolina were arrested by Charlotte Mecklenburg police for allegedly shooting a woman in front of her newborn child. Officers responded to the scene just after 1 o'clock in the morning after receiving reports of shots fired. Upon arriving at the residence, they found the 22-year-old victim suffering from a gunshot wound, with her baby very close by. Police crossed paths with the Code twins while investigating the area and were initially met with physical resistance from both young men. Thankfully for everyone involved, the officers managed to de-escalate the situation and the suspects peacefully surrendered. While executing a search warrant at Daluan and Daquan's home, investigators found more than 130 MDMA pills, over 300 grams of marijuana, 2 guns, drug paraphernalia, and money. Based on what they were able to learn about the incident, detectives concluded that the Codes had opened fire on the victim while chasing her on foot during an altercation with the woman and another person. The victim survived, and the accused gunmen were charged with assault with a deadly weapon with the intent to kill, inflicting serious injury, and resisting or delay or obstruct of a law enforcement officer. Records show that Daquan Code was convicted of discharging a firearm into an occupied property. He received a suspended prison sentence and is currently on probation, while Daluan was found guilty of being a felon in possession of a firearm and sentenced to 24 months of supervision. Number 1. Ron and Tron Jasper. In September of 2015, police in Albemarle, Virginia, responded to a report of gunfire at a local apartment complex. 26-year-old Rashawn Reed had been shot in the face in the building's parking lot following an altercation with 31-year-old twin brothers Ron and Tron Jasper. He was rushed to the hospital where he clung to life for several weeks before succumbing to his injuries. According to law enforcement, the shooting stemmed from a romantic dispute between Ron, Tron, and Keith Jasper and Rashawn and his brother, Jerome. Ron's estranged wife, Heather, was dating Jerome. What began as a shouting match between the parties quickly escalated as the Jaspers drew their weapons. The twins would later claim that the Reeds were trying to provoke a fistfight with them and that they pulled their guns in preparation to defend themselves. The alleged shooter, Ron Jasper, was initially charged with malicious wounding. Following Reed's death, the charge was upgraded to first-degree murder. Tron Jasper, who played a smaller role in the crime, was convicted of a misdemeanor gun charge and sentenced to a year in jail with 6 months suspended. During Ron's trial, the defense argued that Ron feared for his life when he pulled the trigger, claiming that the victim was refusing to back off. The prosecution challenged Ron's self-defense claim, arguing that the defendant had no valid reason to use deadly force, and the jury found him guilty of homicide and using a weapon in the commission of a felony. He was sentenced to 23 years in prison. Thanks for watching. If one person in the entire world could get cloned and you could pick who it was, who would you choose and why? Let us know in the comments section below.